A homeless boy handed me a crumpled note that said, "Your daughter-in-law put something in your coffee. Don't drink it." And my blood turned to ice. I looked down at the steaming mug in my hands, then back at the boy who was already disappearing into the morning crowd. When I confronted Sarah about it, she did something that changed everything forever. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this all started. I'm Dorothy Wells, 68 years old, and I thought I knew my family. After my husband Frank passed away 6 months ago, I moved in with my son Michael and his wife Sarah in their beautiful suburban home in Denver. They insisted it would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. What a joke that turned out to be. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah had made coffee, something she'd begun doing every morning since I arrived. "Fresh pot for you, Dorothy," she'd say with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. I should have noticed how she always handed me a specific mug, the blue one with tiny flowers, while she and Michael drank from plain white ones. I was sitting at their kitchen island, sipping what I now realize was my last innocent cup of coffee, when Sarah announced she was going grocery shopping. "Make yourself at home," she said, grabbing her designer purse, as if I could do anything else in a house where I felt like an unwelcome guest. 20 minutes later, I decided to walk to the corner store for a newspaper. Frank and I had read the morning paper together for 43 years, and old habits die hard. The autumn air was crisp, and for a moment I felt almost human again instead of like the burden everyone seemed to think I was. That's when I saw him. A boy, maybe 10 years old, sitting on the steps of the abandoned building next to the convenience store. His clothes were dirty, his hair matted, and he was clutching a torn backpack like it contained everything he owned. When our eyes met, he stood up with an urgency that made my heart skip. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice small but determined. "Ma'am, please wait." I stopped, something in his tone cutting through my usual wariness of strangers. He approached slowly, like he was afraid I might run away, and pressed a piece of paper into my palm. His hands were cold and trembling. "Don't drink the coffee," he whispered, his young face serious beyond his years. "The lady with the yellow hair, she put something in it. I seen her." Before I could ask what he meant, what he'd seen, or even get his name, he was gone, running down the street like his life depended on it, leaving me standing there with a crumpled note and a growing sense of dread that would change everything. I stared at that piece of paper until the words blurred together, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. The boy's handwriting was shaky but clear. "Your daughter-in-law put something in your coffee. Don't drink it." Below that, in smaller letters, "I watch from the alley. She don't know." My mind raced back to the past few weeks. How tired I'd been feeling every morning, more exhausted than grief alone could explain. The way I'd been sleeping until almost noon, something I'd never done in my entire life. The episodes of dizziness that Sarah attributed to my age and emotional state. "You're just having a hard time adjusting, Dorothy," she'd say with that concerned voice that sounded so sincere. "Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison about something to help you sleep better." But I had been sleeping like the dead, in fact. So deeply that I barely remembered my dreams, waking up groggy and disoriented. Frank used to joke that I was the lightest sleeper in Colorado, able to hear a pin drop 3 rooms away. Yet lately, I could barely drag myself out of bed before lunch. I bought my newspaper with trembling hands, the teenage cashier giving me worried looks as I fumbled with my change. The walk home felt like it took forever, every step filled with a growing certainty that my son's wife had been poisoning me. But why? What could she possibly gain from keeping me sedated? Back at the house, I found my blue mug exactly where I'd left it, still half full of coffee. It looked innocent enough, smelled normal, but the boy's words echoed in my head. I picked it up and walked to the kitchen sink, my heart pounding like I was about to commit a crime. I poured the coffee down the drain and watched it disappear, feeling like I was washing away my own naivety. How long had this been going on? How many mornings had I unknowingly consumed whatever Sarah was giving me? When she returned from grocery shopping an hour later, I was sitting in the living room with my newspaper, trying to look normal while my insides churned with betrayal and fear. "How was your walk?" she asked, setting down bags that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "Fine," I managed, watching her face carefully. "Refreshing. Good. You didn't finish your coffee this morning. Are you feeling all right? The concern in her voice seemed genuine. But now I could hear something else underneath it. Calculation. She was testing me, seeing if I'd noticed anything different. Just wasn't in the mood for it today, I said casually. Maybe I'm finally breaking my caffeine habit. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify. Well, that's probably for the best. Too much caffeine isn't good for someone your age anyway. Someone my age. As if 68 made me decrepit instead of just experienced enough to recognize when I was being manipulated. That night, I lay in the guest room bed. My bed now, I supposed, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The house was quiet except for the usual sounds of Michael and Sarah's evening routine. Television murmuring from their bedroom, water running through pipes, the subtle creaks of a house settling into night. For the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear. Sharp, even. Without whatever Sarah had been putting in my morning coffee. The fog that had been clouding my thoughts was lifting like morning mist. And with that clarity came a terrible understanding of just how vulnerable I'd become. I thought back to the conversations I'd overheard in hushed tones between Michael and Sarah, the ones that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. I'd assumed they were discussing normal marital things, but now fragments came back to me with new meaning. She can't stay here forever, Michael. I know, but what are we supposed to do? She's my mother. There are facilities. Nice ones. She'd probably be happier with people her own age. Facilities. They'd been planning to put me in a nursing home, and Sarah had been drugging me to make me appear more confused, more incapable of caring for myself. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my chest tight with betrayal. Michael, my baby boy, the child I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights and cheered through every baseball game and graduation. He was letting his wife poison his own mother to make their plan easier to justify. I must have dozed fitfully, because I woke to the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. My internal clock said it was around 7, my usual wake-up time back when I lived in my own home, back when I had a life instead of existing as an inconvenience in someone else's. I dressed quietly and made my way to the kitchen, where Sarah was already moving around in her silk robe and expensive slippers. She looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I swear I saw disappointment flash across her face before she pasted on her morning smile. "You're up early today," she said, reaching for my blue mug with the practiced ease of routine. "Must be feeling better." "Much better, actually," I said, accepting the coffee she offered. "Clearer than I have in weeks." I watched her face carefully as I raised the mug to my lips, pretending to take a sip while actually just letting the liquid touch my mouth. She relaxed slightly, turning back to the coffee maker to pour her own cup. "That's wonderful, Dorothy. Michael will be so pleased to hear you're improving." Improving. As if my mental clarity was a medical condition instead of the natural result of not being drugged into submission. I excused myself to use the bathroom, dumping the coffee down the sink and rinsing the mug thoroughly. When I returned to the kitchen, Sarah was gone, but I could hear her voice upstairs, presumably updating Michael on my condition. "She seems more alert today," I heard her say. "Maybe we should increase the dosage." Increase the dosage. Increase the... The words hit me like a slap, confirming what I already knew, but had hoped against hope was just paranoid thinking. My own family was systematically poisoning me, and they were discussing it like a medical treatment plan. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, my newspaper forgotten, and tried to figure out what to do next. The next few days passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of deception. Every morning, Sarah would hand me my coffee with that practiced smile, and I would pretend to drink it while actually disposing of it when she wasn't looking. I became an expert at palming the mug, finding excuses to visit the bathroom, the laundry room, anywhere with a sink where I could empty the contents without being seen. With each passing day without their drugs, my mind grew sharper, my energy returned, and my anger solidified into something cold and calculating. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was gathering intelligence. I started paying attention to their routine, their conversations, their assumptions about my capabilities. Sarah clearly believed I was too addled to notice much of anything, which worked to my advantage. When she talked on the phone to her sister about the situation, she didn't bother lowering her voice anymore. "It's getting worse," I heard her say one afternoon, while I pretended to nap in the living room. She's more confused every day. Michael's finally coming around to the idea that we need professional help. Professional help. Another euphemism for warehousing me somewhere. They wouldn't have to look at me or feel guilty about their treatment. The place in Lakewood has an opening next month, Sarah continued. It's expensive, but it's not like she's going to live forever. Her savings will cover it for a few years, and after that, well, that's what Medicaid is for. My savings. The money Frank and I had carefully accumulated over 43 years of marriage. Scrimping and saving and doing without so we could have security in our old age. They were already spending it in their minds, calculating how long it would last and what they'd do when it was gone. I forced myself to breathe slowly and evenly, to maintain the facade of sleep while my blood boiled with rage. This wasn't just about getting me out of their house anymore. This was about taking everything I had and convincing themselves they were doing me a favor. That evening, Michael sat down beside me on the couch while Sarah was upstairs. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I'd raised, uncertain and sad. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know that whatever happens, I love you." The words should have comforted me, but instead they felt like a goodbye, like he was already mourning the mother he was about to betray. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said, patting his hand with all the warmth I could muster. "You'll always be my baby boy." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah thinks maybe it's time we talk to Dr. Morrison about your options. She's worried about you living independently." "What kind of options?" I asked, playing the confused older woman they expected me to be. "Just different living situations. Places where you could have more support, more social interaction with people your own age. People my own age. As if age were a disease that required quarantine." "That sounds expensive," I said, watching his face. "Don't worry about that, Mom. We'll figure it out." With my money, I thought but didn't say. They'd figure it out with the savings account Frank and I had built together, $1 at a time. Friday morning brought an unexpected opportunity. Sarah announced she was going to her sister's house for the day, some crisis involving a custody battle that required her immediate attention and expertise in drama. Michael had left early for a business trip to Phoenix, wouldn't be back until Sunday night. For the first time in months, I was alone in the house. I waited until Sarah's car disappeared down the street, then moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Whatever she'd been putting in my coffee was somewhere in this house, and I was going to find it. I started with the kitchen, methodically searching through every cabinet, every drawer, every hiding place I could think of. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I reached the high shelf where Sarah kept her specialty items. Exotic spices, expensive extracts, the kind of things she used when she wanted to impress dinner guests with her culinary sophistication. Behind a bottle of vanilla extract from Madagascar, I found a small amber vial with no label. The liquid inside was clear and odorless, but when I held it up to the light, it had a slightly thicker consistency than water. My hands shook as I unscrewed the cap and sniffed cautiously. Nothing. Whatever this was, it was designed to be undetectable. I took pictures of everything with my phone, the vial, its location, the other items around it. Then I carefully replaced it exactly as I'd found it and continued my search. In Sarah's bathroom, buried behind expensive face creams and serums, I found internet printouts about something called liquid melatonin for elderly patients. The dosages discussed were far higher than anything meant for normal sleep aid. These were doses meant to heavily sedate someone, to make them confused and compliant. More pictures, more evidence. My phone was becoming a catalog of my own attempted poisoning. But the real discovery came in Michael's home office, in a locked drawer that wasn't as secure as he thought it was. I'd given him that desk for Christmas 5 years ago, and I remembered the extra key that came with it. Frank had taught me to keep track of such details. Inside, I found brochures for 3 different assisted living facilities, though the photos and descriptions made them look more like expensive prisons than homes. I found printouts of my bank statements, accessed somehow without my knowledge. I found a consultation report from an elder care attorney about incapacity proceedings and guardianship options. They'd been planning this for months. While I grieved my husband and struggled to adjust to widowhood, my son and his wife had been systematically plotting to have me declared incompetent so they could control my finances and my life. The final piece of evidence was a half-written letter to my doctor, signed by Michael, expressing concerns about my mother's increasing confusion and inability to care for herself. It detailed incidents that never happened, symptoms I'd never displayed, all building a case for why I needed to be institutionalized for my own safety. I photographed everything, my hands steady now with cold fury. They thought they were dealing with a confused old woman who wouldn't notice what they were doing. They had no idea they'd awakened something far more dangerous, a mother who'd realized her own child was betraying her. As I carefully returned everything to its original position, I heard a car in the driveway. Sarah was back early. I made it to the living room just as the front door opened, settling into my chair with the newspaper and trying to look like I'd been dozing peacefully all afternoon. "Dorothy?" Sarah called out. "I'm back. How was your day?" "Quiet," I said, not trusting myself to say more. But inside, I was planning. And for the first time since Frank died, I felt like myself again. Saturday morning arrived with the promise of reckoning. I woke before dawn, my mind crystal clear and my resolve absolute. Today, I would confront them with what I knew. Today, the careful deception would end. I dressed in my best outfit, the navy blue dress Frank had always loved, the one that made me feel dignified and strong. If I was going to tear my family apart, I was going to do it looking like a woman who commanded respect. Sarah was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, going through her morning routine with mechanical precision. She looked up when I entered, and I saw that flicker of disappointment again when she noticed I was dressed and alert instead of shuffling around in my bathrobe like I had been for weeks. "You look nice today, Dorothy," she said, reaching for my blue mug. "Special occasion?" "You could say that," I replied, accepting the coffee and wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made her pause, coffee pot still in hand. "Oh? About what?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the first photograph, the amber vial hidden behind her vanilla extract. "About this." The color drained from Sarah's face so quickly I thought she might faint. The coffee pot slipped from her hand and shattered on the kitchen floor, sending hot coffee and broken ceramic everywhere. "I don't know what you think you're looking at," she said, but her voice had lost all its artificial sweetness. "I think I'm looking at evidence that you've been drugging me for weeks," I said calmly. "Every morning in my coffee. Liquid melatonin in doses high enough to keep me sedated and confused." Sarah's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating woman underneath. "You're being paranoid, Dorothy. That's just vanilla extract." I swiped to the next photo, the printouts about elderly sedation. Then the next, the assisted living brochures. Her eyes widened with each image, the reality of her situation dawning on her. "Where did you get those?" she whispered. "From your husband's office, from your bathroom, from all the places you thought I was too drugged to look." I stood up, still holding my untouched coffee. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice eventually? Or were you planning to increase the dosage until I was too far gone to figure it out?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Sarah laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "You want to know the truth, Dorothy? Fine. Yes, I've been giving you something to help you sleep. Yes, Michael and I think you need more care than we can provide. And yes, we've been looking into options for your future." "My future," I repeated. "You mean my money?" Her eyes flashed with something ugly. "Your money won't last forever, especially not in those expensive facilities. Someone has to think practically about these things. Someone like you. Someone who isn't blinded by sentiment and denial about what's best for everyone involved." I walked to the kitchen sink and slowly, deliberately, poured my coffee down the drain. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, turning back to face her. "You're going to stop poisoning me. You're going to stop planning my life without my consent. And you're going to explain to Michael exactly what you've been doing when he gets home tomorrow." Sarah's laugh was bitter now. "Or what? You'll tell him yourself? Who do you think he's going to believe? His wife or his confused mother who's clearly becoming paranoid and delusional?" I smiled, and something in my expression made her take a step back. "Oh, Sarah," I said softly, "you have no idea what you've awakened." Sunday evening brought Michael home from Phoenix, and I watched from my bedroom window as his car pulled into the driveway. Sarah had spent the weekend walking on eggshells around me, clearly unsure whether I would follow through on my threat to expose her. She was about to find out. I'd prepared for this conversation like a general preparing for battle. Every piece of evidence was organized on my phone, every argument rehearsed, every possible response anticipated. Frank used to say I was like a dog with a bone when I set my mind to something. Tonight, that stubborn streak was going to serve me well. "Mom!" Michael called out as he entered the house, his voice carrying the false cheer of someone who thought he was coming home to a manageable situation. "How was your weekend?" "Enlightening," I said, coming down the stairs with steady, purposeful steps. "We need to have a family meeting." Sarah appeared from the kitchen, her face pale but determined. She'd clearly spent the weekend deciding how to spin this situation in her favor. "Michael, honey," she said, moving to his side with practiced ease. "Your mother had some kind of episode yesterday. She's been acting paranoid, making accusations. I think we need to call Dr. Morrison." I almost admired her strategy. Attack first, establish me as the unreliable narrator before I could present my evidence. But she'd underestimated how sharp my mind had become without her chemical interference. "What kind of accusations?" Michael asked, looking between us with growing concern. "The kind that come with evidence," I said, pulling out my phone. "Sit down, son, both of you." There was something in my tone that brooked no argument. Michael sat on the couch, Sarah beside him, their body language already defensive. I started with the amber vial, showing them the photo and explaining how I'd found it hidden in the kitchen. Sarah immediately began to protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said. "This is liquid melatonin, purchased online in doses far exceeding anything meant for normal sleep aid. These are doses meant to sedate elderly patients into compliance." Michael's face went white. "Mom, that's impossible. Sarah wouldn't..." "Wouldn't what? Drug your mother to make her appear incompetent so you could justify putting her in a nursing home?" I swiped to the next photo. "Like these facilities you've already researched." The brochures flashed on my screen, and I watched Michael's expression shift from disbelief to recognition, to something that might have been shame. "We were just looking at options," he said weakly, "in case your condition deteriorated." "My condition," I repeated. "You mean the condition your wife was creating by poisoning my coffee every morning?" Sarah finally found her voice. "Michael, don't listen to her. She's having delusions. This is exactly what I was talking about." "Really?" I interrupted, showing him the next photo. "Am I delusional about this letter you wrote to Dr. Morrison, documenting incidents that never happened? Or this consultation with an elder care attorney about having me declared incompetent?" The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at the screen, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. When he finally looked up at Sarah, his expression was one I'd never seen before. "Tell me this isn't true," he said quietly. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "Michael, you know how confused she's been getting. Someone had to think about the future, about what was best for everyone. By drugging her?" His voice rose. "By making her sick so we could justify taking control of her life? We weren't making her sick. We were helping her get the rest she needed. She was grieving, not sleeping well." "Bullshit," I said, and both of them stared at me in shock. I don't think I'd cursed in front of Michael since he was a teenager. "You were systematically sedating me to make me appear incapable of caring for myself. And you were doing it so you could access my savings account." Michael looked like he'd been slapped. "Your savings? Mom, we never..." "Check your bank records, son. Someone's been monitoring my accounts. Someone's been calculating how long my money would last in those expensive facilities." I leaned forward. "Someone's been planning my entire future without bothering to ask me what I wanted." Michael stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from his childhood whenever he was caught in a lie. "This is insane. Sarah, tell me you didn't actually drug my mother." Sarah's face had taken on a defiant cast. "I gave her something to help her sleep. She was having such a hard time adjusting after your father died. I thought if she could just rest better, get her strength back." "For weeks?" I interjected. "You've been drugging me for weeks, making me so groggy I could barely function, making your husband think I was losing my mind." "You were losing your mind," Sarah snapped, her careful facade finally crumbling completely. "Wandering around the house at all hours, crying, not eating properly. Someone had to take control of the situation." "Someone had to take control of my bank account, you mean?" Michael's head whipped toward his wife. What bank account? Sarah, what is she talking about? I watched the calculation in Sarah's eyes, saw her trying to decide how much to admit, how much she could spin to sound reasonable. Your mother is almost 70 years old, Michael. She's living on a fixed income, vulnerable to scams, not thinking clearly about her finances. I was trying to protect her. By accessing my accounts without permission? I asked. By researching how long my savings would last in a nursing home? The betrayal on Michael's face was almost painful to watch. This was his wife, the woman he'd trusted with everything, and she'd been lying to him as much as she'd been lying to me. Show me, he said quietly. I pulled up the photos of my bank statements, the ones I'd found in his office with handwritten calculations in Sarah's neat script. Numbers showing how long my savings would last at various facilities, what would happen when the money ran out, the cold mathematics of disposing of an inconvenient elderly relative. Jesus Christ, Sarah, Michael whispered. These are Mom's private financial records. How did you even get these? I have your power of attorney for her accounts, Sarah said, but her voice had lost its conviction. No, I said firmly. You don't. Frank and I never gave anyone power of attorney over our finances. We were very careful about that. Michael's face was getting redder by the second. Then how? I may have used your login information, Sarah admitted. The bank's website. You showed me how to access it once when you were helping your mother with her online banking. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. Michael was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. You used my identity to access my mother's bank accounts without her consent, he said slowly, like he was trying to make sense of an impossible equation. I was trying to plan for her future. You were committing fraud, I said, and identity theft, and elder abuse. Should I continue? Sarah's composure finally shattered completely. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been giving you something to help you sleep. Yes, I've been monitoring your finances. Yes, I've been researching care facilities because someone had to think practically about this situation. She stood up, pacing now, her hands gesturing wildly. Do you have any idea what it's like having you in our house? The constant depression, the crying, the way you make everyone feel guilty just by existing. Michael works 70 hours a week trying to support this family, and he comes home to his mother mourning all over everything. The cruelty in her voice took my breath away, but I forced myself to remain calm. So, your solution was to drug me until I was compliant enough to warehouse? My solution was to help you transition to a place where you could get proper care without destroying our marriage in the process. Michael had gone very still, the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Get out. Sarah stopped pacing. What? Get out of this house, now, tonight. Michael, you're overreacting. We can work through this. You drugged my mother. The words came out as a roar that seemed to shake the windows. You violated her bank accounts. You forged documents. You've been systematically abusing an elderly woman, and that woman is my mother. I watched my daughter-in-law's face cycle through shock, anger, and finally, calculation. This wasn't going the way she'd expected. If I leave, I'm taking half of everything, she said coldly. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts. I've been married to you for 15 years, Michael. I'm entitled to half. Michael's laugh was bitter. Half of what? The mortgage payments you've been planning to fund with my mother's savings? The retirement accounts you've been calculating how to access when she's safely locked away? For the first time since this confrontation began, Sarah looked genuinely afraid. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, legal threats, and the kind of family drama I'd hoped never to experience. Sarah called her sister, her mother, and finally a lawyer, all while packing her belongings with the efficiency of someone who'd planned for this contingency. Michael sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, looking like a man whose entire world had just collapsed, which I supposed it had. I'm sorry, Mom, he said for the dozenth time. I had no idea. I should have seen it, should have known something was wrong. How could you have known? I asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. She was very good at what she did. Professional-level manipulation. But the signs were all there. The way you were sleeping so much, how confused you seemed some days. I just thought it was grief. I sat down across from him, studying his face. My son looked older than his 42 years, worn down by guilt and betrayal. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but alert. How much of this did you actually agree with? Not the drugging. I know you didn't know about that. But the nursing home idea, taking control of my finances. How much of that was your idea? Michael was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with the truth. Some of it, he finally admitted. Not the details, not the specific plans. But Sarah had convinced me that you weren't capable of living independently anymore. She said you were getting confused, forgetting things, that it was dangerous for you to be alone. And you believed her. She's a nurse, Mom, or was, before she quit to focus on her career in interior design. I trusted her medical opinion. Her medical opinion that your 68-year-old mother needed to be institutionalized after 6 months of widowhood. He flinched. When you put it like that, it sounds insane. It is insane. I'm not some doddering old fool, Michael. I'm a woman who lost her husband of 43 years and needed time to grieve, not a medical diagnosis. From upstairs came the sound of Sarah's heels clicking across the hardwood floor, followed by the thump of suitcases being dragged. She was really leaving. After 15 years of marriage, she was walking away because her plan to control my life had been exposed. What happens now? Michael asked. Now you decide what kind of man you want to be, I said. The kind who lets his wife abuse his mother, or the kind who protects his family. I want to protect you, Mom, but I don't know how to undo this. The damage to our relationship, to our trust. Trust is earned, I interrupted, and it can be earned again if you're willing to do the work. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, 2 large suitcases in tow. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the exposure of her true nature. I'll be staying at my sister's while my lawyer sorts this out, she announced. Don't think this is over, Michael. I've invested 15 years in this marriage, and I'm not walking away empty-handed. You're walking away with your freedom, I said calmly. Considering what you've done, that's more generous than you deserve. Her eyes flashed with hatred. You sanctimonious old bitch, you think you've won something here? You've destroyed my marriage, my life. I've exposed your crimes, I corrected. There's a difference. Michael won't choose you over me. He's my husband. Michael stood up slowly, his face set in lines I'd never seen before. You're right, Sarah. You are my wife, were my wife, but she's my mother, and what you did to her is unforgivable. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions, shock, rage, disbelief, and finally, cold acceptance. You'll regret this, she said. Both of you. She turned and walked toward the front door, her heels echoing through the house one last time. The door slammed behind her with a finality that seemed to shake the walls. Michael and I sat in the sudden silence, processing the enormity of what had just happened. I feel like I don't know anything anymore, he said quietly. You know what's right and what's wrong, I replied. That's enough to start with. 3 weeks later, I stood in the kitchen making coffee for 2, real coffee, in matching mugs, no hidden additives or secret agendas. Michael had taken a leave of absence from work to help me sort through the legal mess Sarah had created, and we were slowly rebuilding something that resembled a normal relationship. The divorce proceedings were ugly, as I'd expected them to be. Sarah's lawyer had initially tried to argue that I was an unreliable witness due to my documented cognitive decline, until Michael's attorney produced the medical evidence that I'd been systematically drugged. The cognitive decline, it turned out, was entirely artificial. The elder abuse charges were more serious. Sarah was facing potential jail time for the drugging, the financial fraud, and the identity theft. Her nursing license had been suspended pending investigation. The perfect life she'd been so desperate to protect was crumbling around her. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Mom, Michael said, coming into the kitchen with his phone in hand. You're not going to believe this. That was Detective Martinez. They want to talk to you about the homeless boy. I looked up from the coffee maker. What about him? Apparently he's not just any homeless kid. His name is Tommy Chen. He's 11 years old, and he's been missing from the foster care system for 3 months. They found him yesterday. My heart clenched. Is he okay? He's fine. Better than fine, actually. But Mom, you're not going to believe what he told them about how he knew to warn you. I set down my coffee mug, giving Michael my full attention. He's been living in that abandoned building for weeks, watching the neighborhood. He saw Sarah putting something in your coffee cup every morning when she thought no one was looking. But he recognized what she was doing because his previous foster mother used to drug him the same way. The words hit me like a physical blow. His foster mother drugged him? Liquid melatonin in massive doses to keep him quiet and compliant. The same thing Sarah was doing to you. When he saw her tampering with your coffee, he knew exactly what was happening. I thought about that brave little boy living on the streets, watching a stranger being abused and deciding to risk himself to help her. Where is he now? Child Protective Services has him temporarily, but Mom... Michael paused, looking uncertain. He asked if he could see you again. He wants to know if you're okay. Of course I want to see him. That child saved my life. There's more. The investigators found evidence that his foster family was running a medication scam, drugging multiple children to keep them manageable while collecting state payments. Tommy's testimony is going to help put them away. I sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the ripple effects of one boy's courage. He saved more than just me. He did. And Mom, I've been thinking. Our house has plenty of room. If you wanted to look into becoming a foster parent or even adopting... I stared at my son, seeing something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Hope, purpose, the desire to do something meaningful instead of just profitable. You'd be okay with that? Having both an elderly mother and a foster child in your house? Michael's smile was the first genuine one I'd seen from him in months. I think we could all use a fresh start. And Tommy already proved he's got good instincts about protecting family. The word family hung in the air between us, fragile but full of possibility. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen making coffee for 3. Tommy Chen sat at the table working on his homework, his reading glasses sliding down his nose as he concentrated on a math problem. Michael was upstairs getting ready for work, humming off-key the way he used to when he was a child. The house felt alive again, full of the kind of noise and chaos that comes with family. Real family, chosen family, the kind built on love and protection rather than obligation and manipulation. Tommy had been with us for 4 months now, officially in our care as foster parents, while the adoption paperwork moved through the system. He was nothing like the scared, homeless boy I'd met that morning outside the convenience store. Proper food, regular sleep, and the security of knowing he was wanted had transformed him into the brilliant, funny, occasionally exasperating 11-year-old he was meant to be. "Dorothy," he said, not looking up from his math, "can you help me with number 7? I keep getting the wrong answer." I walked over and looked at his work, noting the careful way he'd shown each step. "You're doing everything right, sweetheart, but you made a small error here in the multiplication." He erased and recalculated, his face lighting up when he got the correct answer. "Thanks. You're way better at explaining this stuff than my last foster mom." It was the first time he'd mentioned his previous placement in weeks. The therapy was helping, slowly teaching him that not all adults would hurt him, that this new life was real and permanent. Michael appeared in the kitchen, straightening his tie. The past months had changed him too, given him a sense of purpose beyond just earning money. He'd started volunteering with a local organization that helped children in foster care, using his business skills to help them navigate the system. "Big day today," he announced. "The final adoption hearing." Tommy looked up from his homework, his expression carefully neutral. He'd learned early not to get too excited about good news, but I could see the hope he was trying to hide. "Whatever happens," I told him, "you're staying with us. This is your home now, even if the adoption doesn't go through." "Even if the adoption doesn't go through," Michael confirmed. "Though I don't think we need to worry about that. Judge Henderson has already indicated she's inclined to approve it." After breakfast, we all piled into Michael's car for the drive to the courthouse. Tommy was unusually quiet, but he held my hand tightly as we walked through the halls where his future would be decided. The hearing itself was surprisingly brief. Judge Henderson asked Tommy if he understood what adoption meant, if he was sure he wanted Michael and me to be his legal family. His answer was simple and perfect. "They already are my family. This just makes it official." When the judge signed the papers, Tommy Chen became Tommy Wells. Not just our foster child, but our son and grandson, legally and forever. Outside the courthouse, Tommy looked up at me with those serious eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "Dorothy, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." If I hadn't warned you about the coffee that day, what do you think would have happened? I considered the question carefully. Sarah's plan had been thorough, methodical. Without Tommy's intervention, I might very well have ended up exactly where she wanted me, sedated, confused, and helpless in some expensive facility while my savings paid for my own imprisonment. I think, I said finally, that you saved us all. Not just me, but Michael too, and yourself. Sometimes when people are drowning, they can't see the way to shore until someone throws them a rope. He nodded solemnly, then surprised me by grinning. So we all saved each other? We all saved each other, I agreed. As we drove home through the suburban streets where this all began, I thought about the homeless boy who'd risked himself to help a stranger, the son who'd found the courage to choose right over easy, and the new family we'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Sarah's plan had been to make me disappear, to erase my independence and my dignity in service of her comfortable life. Instead, her cruelty had led to the creation of something beautiful, a family bound not by obligation or genetics alone, but by the conscious choice to protect and love each other. That evening, as I tucked Tommy into the bed in what was now officially his room, he looked up at me with a sleepy smile. "Good night, Grandma Dorothy," he said. It was the first time he'd called me Grandma, and the word hit my heart like a gentle explosion of joy. "Good night, sweetheart," I replied. "Sweet dreams." As I turned off his light and headed to my own room, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us all here. It had started with betrayal and drugged coffee, with a homeless child's courage and a family torn apart by greed. But it had ended with healing, with justice, and with the kind of love that chooses to see the best in people, even when they're at their worst. I was Dorothy Wells, 70-year-old grandmother, mother, and survivor. And for the first time since Frank died, I was exactly where I belonged. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.